Respect does not begin when people finally notice you. It begins in the moment you stop needing them to notice you. Most people spend their lives trying to earn respect from the outside while secretly neglecting the one relationship that determines every other relationship, the relationship they have with themselves. They want people to admire them, approve of them, choose them, listen to them, and recognize their value. But when your confidence depends on another person's reaction, you have already surrendered part of your power. One compliment can make you feel important. One criticism can make you doubt yourself. One rejection can make you question your worth. One cold response can make you chase harder. And suddenly, without realizing it, someone else's opinion has become the remote control for your emotional state. That is not respect. That is dependence. Real respect begins when you become internally secure enough to stand by your values, even when nobody is applauding. This is where people misunderstand confidence. They think confidence means being the loudest person in the room, dominating conversations, acting intimidating, or making sure everyone notices their presence. But the strongest confidence is rarely loud. It does not need to announce itself because it comes from certainty. You know what you believe. You know what you tolerate. You know what you will never compromise. You know that criticism cannot destroy you and praise cannot define you. That kind of confidence creates presence before you even speak. Ask yourself what happens when you enter a room and immediately start wondering how everyone sees you. Do they like me? Do I look confident? Did I say the right thing? Are they impressed? Why aren't they paying attention to me? The moment these questions take control, your attention leaves the present moment. You stop observing people and start monitoring yourself. You become more concerned with being accepted than with actually being authentic. And people can sense that tension. Now imagine the opposite. You walk into the same room without needing to prove anything. You listen carefully. You speak when you have something meaningful to say. You don't force yourself into every conversation. You don't laugh at everything simply because others are laughing. You don't change your opinion because someone important disagrees. You remain calm. That difference is powerful. You are no longer performing. You are present. And presence is one of the foundations of respect. Robert Greene's philosophy repeatedly points toward the importance of understanding human behavior, perception, and self-control. People pay attention to consistency. They notice when your words and actions match. They notice whether you collapse under criticism or remain composed. They notice whether your boundaries disappear whenever someone applies pressure. Your reputation is not created by one dramatic moment. It is created through repeated behavior. That is why self-respect must come before social respect. If you constantly violate your own standards, other people eventually learn that those standards are negotiable. If you say you will leave when someone repeatedly disrespects you but always remain, your words lose weight. If you say you value your time but abandon your priorities whenever someone demands attention, your behavior contradicts your claim. If you constantly tell people you are confident but become desperate whenever someone withdraws attention, your actions reveal the insecurity underneath the words. People believe behavior more than declarations, so stop announcing who you are. Build it, let your actions speak. This does not mean becoming harsh. It does not mean treating people badly. It does not mean believing you are better than everyone else. In fact, genuine self-respect makes arrogance unnecessary. Arrogance constantly needs to prove superiority. Self-respect doesn't. Arrogance says, I need you to know I'm important. Self-respect says, I know who I am and I don't need to prove it. That distinction changes everything. You can be kind without becoming submissive. You can be generous without becoming available to everyone. You can listen without agreeing. You can disagree without becoming disrespectful. You can walk away without creating drama. You can say no without feeling guilty. And you can accept criticism without allowing it to become an attack on your identity. This is emotional independence. When someone criticizes you, don't immediately defend yourself. Pause. Ask whether there is something useful hidden inside the criticism. If there is, learn from it. If there isn't, release it. When someone praises you, appreciate it without becoming dependent on more. When someone rejects you, allow yourself to feel disappointed without turning that disappointment into the belief that you are not valuable. When someone ignores you, don't immediately chase them for an explanation. Your worth does not rise and fall according to another person's attention. The person who understands this becomes extremely difficult to manipulate because manipulation often begins where insecurity exists. If someone knows you desperately need approval, they can influence you through praise. If they know you fear rejection, they can influence you through withdrawal. If they know you hate disappointing people, they can influence you through guilt. But when you become comfortable with your own identity, those tactics lose much of their power. You can hear someone say, "I'm disappointed in you," without immediately abandoning your principles. You can hear, "Everyone disagrees with you," without automatically changing your position. You can hear, "You're different now," and calmly recognize that perhaps you are. Growth often looks like a personality change to people who benefited from your old behavior. The person who always said yes begins saying no. The person who always explained everything becomes more private. The person who constantly chased approval becomes comfortable with silence. The person who accepted disrespect begins enforcing boundaries, and suddenly people say, "You've changed." Maybe you have. Maybe that is exactly the point. You are not supposed to remain the same person simply because others became comfortable with your weaknesses. There will always be people who prefer the version of you that was easier to control. Your responsibility is not to preserve their comfort. Your responsibility is to protect your character. And this is where respect becomes natural. You don't demand it. You don't threaten people into giving it. You don't manipulate people into fearing you. You earn it through consistency. You become someone who keeps promises, someone who speaks honestly, someone who controls their reactions, someone who protects their time, someone who does not abandon their principles under pressure, someone who can walk away from disrespect without needing revenge, someone who can stand alone without becoming desperate for attention. That person does not have to ask for respect. People feel it. So from this moment forward, stop asking, "How can I make people respect me?" Ask a deeper question. What kind of person would I have to become so that my behavior naturally commands respect? Then build that person quietly. Respect yourself when nobody is watching, and eventually your presence will speak before your words ever do. Once you stop depending on approval, the next battle begins inside your own mind. Because even when you know your value, one uncontrolled reaction can give away the strength you have spent years building. Someone criticizes you and you immediately become defensive. Someone ignores you and you feel compelled to respond. Someone challenges your opinion and suddenly you need to prove yourself. This is where emotional control becomes one of the strongest foundations of respect. People naturally pay attention to the person who remains composed when everyone else becomes reactive. Not because that person is emotionless, but because they have learned something most people never master. You can experience an emotion without allowing that emotion to make your decisions. Think about the difference between reacting and responding. A reaction is immediate. Something happens, emotion rises, and behavior follows before your judgment has time to catch up. A response creates space. You notice what you feel, you understand what is happening, and then you choose what deserves your attention. That small space between emotion and action can completely change how people perceive you. It can be the difference between appearing unstable and appearing grounded, between losing an argument and controlling the direction of a conversation. Robert Greene's ideas about power repeatedly emphasize the importance of observing human behavior rather than becoming controlled by it. If someone knows exactly which words make you angry, which comments make you insecure, or which situations make you desperate for approval, they can predict your behavior. And anything predictable can be influenced. The person who can trigger you whenever they want has discovered a weakness in your emotional system. But when you become difficult to provoke, that influence begins to disappear. Imagine someone says something insulting about you in front of others. Your first instinct may be to defend yourself immediately. You want everyone to know the truth. You want the other person to understand that they crossed a line. But pause for a moment. Ask yourself what your reaction will accomplish. Will shouting make you stronger? Will proving that you are angry make the situation better? Or will your reaction simply give the other person exactly what they wanted, a visible demonstration that they can control your emotions? Sometimes the strongest response is calmness, not weakness, not fear. Calmness. You look at the situation clearly. You decide whether the comment deserves an answer. If it does, you respond directly and without unnecessary emotion. If it doesn't, you let it disappear. That ability to choose your response creates a kind of psychological freedom. This is why emotional control should never be confused with suppressing emotions. You are allowed to feel anger, disappointment, frustration, sadness, or nervousness. Strength does not mean pretending those emotions don't exist. Strength means understanding them without becoming their servant. You can feel angry and still speak respectfully. You can feel disappointed and still make a wise decision. You can feel nervous and still act with courage. The emotion is information. It does not have to become instruction. production. That distinction can transform your relationships. When someone raises their voice, you don't automatically raise yours. When someone becomes impatient, you don't become impatient. When someone tries to rush your decision, you don't allow their urgency to become your urgency. When someone wants an immediate answer, you can say, "I'll think about it." That simple sentence demonstrates something powerful. Your decisions belong to you. Machiavelli understood that people watch how others behave under pressure. Anyone can appear confident when everything is going well. The real test comes when circumstances become uncomfortable. Pressure reveals habits. Conflict reveals discipline. Rejection reveals emotional independence. When you remain composed during difficult moments, people begin recognizing that your confidence is not an act. Consider two people facing the same disagreement. One becomes louder and more aggressive, interrupting constantly and trying to win through force. The other listens carefully, pauses, and answers only when necessary. Who appears more in control? Usually, it is the person who does not need to fight for control. This is why silence can sometimes be more powerful than an argument. When you refuse to react impulsively, you deny the situation the ability to dictate your behavior. You become the person observing the moment rather than the person being carried away by it. But emotional control also means knowing when to act. Calmness does not mean tolerating everything. If someone repeatedly crosses a boundary, your response may need to be direct. The difference is that you act from clarity rather than rage. You don't need to insult someone to establish a boundary. You don't need to threaten someone to make your position clear. A calm, firm statement can be far more powerful than an emotional outburst. This is where respect begins to deepen. People discover that they cannot easily manipulate your emotional state. They learn that provoking you does not automatically produce the reaction they want. They recognize that you listen, think, and choose. That predictability of character creates trust, while unpredictability of emotional reaction often creates uncertainty. Start practicing this in ordinary moments. Before answering a difficult message, pause. Before responding to criticism, breathe. Before defending yourself, ask whether a defense is actually necessary. Before making a decision while angry, give yourself time. Before sending an emotional response, read it again later. These small habits may seem insignificant, but they train your mind to create distance between emotion and action. Over time, that distance becomes strength, and something remarkable happens. You stop needing to win every interaction. You stop feeling attacked by every disagreement. You stop treating every criticism as a threat. You become more curious and less defensive. You listen more carefully because your ego no longer needs to dominate every conversation. People notice. They begin trusting you with difficult conversation. They become more careful about disrespecting you. They recognize that your calmness is not weakness but discipline. And most importantly, you begin trusting yourself, because every time you control a reaction that would have once controlled you, you prove that your emotions belong to you. The strongest person in the room is not always the loudest, most intimidating, or most dominant. Sometimes it is the person who can remain calm while everyone else is losing control, think clearly while others are reacting, and choose a response instead of surrendering to an impulse. Master that space between emotion and action, and you will discover that the calmest person in the room often carries the greatest influence. There is a moment when your words stop being background noise and start carrying weight. It does not happen because you suddenly become louder. It happens because you become more deliberate. Most people speak too much because silence makes them uncomfortable. They explain every decision, fill every pause, interrupt because they're afraid of losing attention, and keep talking long after their point has already been understood. They believe more words create more influence. In reality, uncontrolled speech often does the opposite. When every thought is immediately released, very little feels valuable. But when you learn to pause, observe, and speak with intention, people begin listening differently. Your goal is not to say more. Your goal is to make what you say matter. Think about the difference between someone who speaks from nervousness and someone who speaks from certainty. The nervous speaker rushes, they repeat themselves, they add unnecessary explanations, they constantly check the other person's reaction. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? I'm not saying you're wrong, but every sentence seems to ask for permission. The composed speaker is different. They think first, they choose their words, they allow a pause, then they speak. That small difference can completely change how others perceive them. Robert Greene's broader philosophy emphasizes understanding, perception, and human behavior. People are constantly interpreting signals, including the way you communicate. Your words are only one part of the message. Your timing, tone, patience, and willingness to remain silent also communicate something. When you speak deliberately, you signal that you are comfortable with your own thoughts. You do not need to rush because you are not afraid of losing the room. This is why silence can become a powerful part of communication, not manipulative silence, not the silent treatment, simply the ability to allow a moment to exist without immediately filling it. Someone asks you a difficult question. Instead of answering instantly, you pause. Someone challenges your opinion. Instead of becoming defensive, you think. Someone makes an accusation. Instead of producing 10 explanations, you decide whether a response is even necessary. That pause gives your mind control over your mouth, and that control creates presence. One of the biggest mistakes people make is believing they need to prove intelligence by speaking constantly. But intelligence is often demonstrated through the ability to listen. When you genuinely listen, you learn what people care about, what motivates them, what concerns them, and what they are actually saying beneath their words. A person who listens carefully often understands more than the person who is constantly trying to be heard. There is also a deeper psychological advantage to listening. When people feel heard, they become more open. They reveal more, they explain more, and you gain a clearer understanding of the situation. You don't need to dominate the conversation to have influence. Sometimes the person asking the best question controls the direction of the conversation more effectively than the person giving the longest speech. So instead of always asking, "What should I say next?" begin asking, "What am I missing?" That question changes your communication. You become curious instead of performative. You stop preparing your next argument while someone else is speaking. You start actually listening, and people notice when someone genuinely listens. Another important habit is eliminating unnecessary explanations. If you make a decision, you do not always need to provide a complete history of why you made it. If you decline an invitation, a simple and respectful answer can be enough. If you disagree, you can state your position without attacking the person. The more secure you become, the less you feel compelled to defend every choice. This does not mean being vague or dismissive. Clear communication matters, but clarity and over-explanation are not the same thing. Clarity says, "This is my decision." Over-explanation says, "Please agree with my decision." Learn the difference. Your words become stronger when they come from conviction rather than the fear of being misunderstood. There is another powerful principle. Do not speak simply because you can. Every conversation has moments when saying less creates more impact. If someone makes an unfair accusation, you don't need to respond to every detail. If someone tries to pull you into an argument, you can refuse the invitation. If a conversation becomes unproductive, you can calmly end it. You are allowed to choose where your attention goes. That choice is part of self-respect. And this connects directly to the previous key point about emotional control. If you cannot control your emotions, you will struggle to control your communication. Anger makes you speak too quickly. Anxiety makes you explain too much. Insecurity makes you seek reassurance. Confidence gives you patience. So before you speak, ask yourself 3 simple questions. Is this necessary? Is this true? Will saying it improve the situation? If the answer is no, silence may be the wiser choice. This discipline becomes especially powerful during conflict. Imagine someone trying to provoke you. They want you to react emotionally. They want you to say something you will regret. They want you to abandon your composure. You don't have to participate. You can lower your voice instead of raising it. You can slow down instead of rushing. You can say, "I understand your point," without agreeing. You can say, "I need some time to think about that." Instead of giving an impulsive answer, these responses demonstrate control without aggression. Over time, people learn that when you speak, there is usually a reason. Your words become less frequent but more meaningful. Your pauses become comfortable. Your listening becomes stronger. Your communication becomes cleaner. And that is when your presence begins to change. You no longer enter conversations trying to prove your intelligence. You enter them trying to understand. You no longer speak to receive approval. You speak because you have something worth contributing. You no longer fear silence. You use it as space to think. That is the difference between talking to be noticed and communicating to be respected. Let your words become deliberate, your silence become comfortable, and your communication becomes so clear that people pay attention not because you demand it, but because they know that when you speak, you mean what you say. The moment you establish self-respect and learn to control your emotions, another test appears: boundaries. Because confidence means very little if people can constantly cross your limits without consequence. You can speak calmly, carry yourself with confidence, and understand your own worth. But if you accept treatment that violates your standards simply because you are afraid of losing someone's approval, people will eventually learn that your boundaries are negotiable. Respect is not created by demanding that everyone treat you well. It is created by consistently showing people what you will and will not accept. And the key word is consistently. A boundary you enforce once and abandon the next time someone pressures you is not really a boundary. It is only a request. Many people confuse kindness with unlimited access. They believe being a good person means always saying yes, always being available, always forgiving, and always giving another chance. But kindness without boundaries can become self-neglect. You can care about people without allowing them to control your time. You can forgive someone without giving them unlimited opportunities to repeat the same behavior. You can love someone without accepting disrespect. You can be understanding without abandoning your own standards. This is where emotional maturity becomes visible. Imagine someone repeatedly interrupts you whenever you speak. The insecure response may be to stay silent because you don't want to appear difficult. Eventually, frustration builds until one day you explode. The stronger response is much simpler. You calmly make it clear that you want to finish your thought. No insult, no dramatic confrontation, no attempt to humiliate the other person. Just clarity. That is what a healthy boundary looks like. It does not need anger to become powerful. It needs consistency. Robert Greene's ideas about human behavior often point toward the importance of understanding patterns. People learn from repeated interactions. If you repeatedly tolerate something, they may assume it is acceptable. If you consistently respond with calm firmness, they learn that your standards are real. This is why boundaries should not be threats. A threat says, if you do this again, I'll punish you. A boundary says, if this continues, I will remove myself from the situation. The difference is enormous. A threat focuses on controlling another person. A boundary focuses on controlling your own response. That is real personal power. You cannot force someone to respect you. You can decide what you will do when they don't. That distinction will save you from countless unnecessary arguments. Suppose someone repeatedly speaks to you disrespectfully. You don't need to spend an hour convincing them that they are wrong. You can calmly say that you are willing to continue the conversation when it becomes respectful. If they continue, you step away. No performance, no revenge, no dramatic speech, just action. And action gives your words credibility. This connects directly to the previous key point about communication. If you constantly announce boundaries but never enforce them, your words lose weight. People learn that your no actually means maybe. Your warnings become background noise. But when your words and actions match, something changes. People begin taking you seriously, not because they fear you, because they understand you. They know where you stand. They know that pressure will not easily change your decisions, that predictability creates respect. One of the hardest boundaries to establish is the ability to say no without providing an enormous explanation. People pleasers often believe every no requires a detailed justification. They feel guilty if they cannot prove that their reason is important enough. But you do not need a courtroom defense for every personal decision. Sometimes I can't do that is enough. Sometimes that doesn't work for me is enough. Sometimes I've decided to go another direction is enough. You can be polite without becoming apologetic. There is a difference between saying, I'm sorry, I'm terrible, I hope you don't hate me, but maybe I can't, and calmly saying, I won't be able to do that. The second communicates certainty, and certainty creates clarity. This does not mean becoming insensitive. There will be situations where an explanation is appropriate. Healthy relationships require communication. But the explanation should come from respect, not fear. You should not have to destroy your own peace simply to prevent someone else from experiencing temporary disappointment. People will sometimes be disappointed when you set boundaries. Let them. Disappointment is not the same as harm. Someone being unhappy with your decision does not automatically mean your decision was wrong. This is one of the most important lessons for anyone trying to build genuine confidence. If your boundaries disappear whenever someone becomes upset, then your boundaries are controlled by their emotions. And that brings us back to emotional control. The person who can remain calm while someone else is angry has an enormous advantage. They do not need to absorb the other person's emotional state. They can recognize it without becoming controlled by it. Someone raises their voice, you lower yours. Someone demands an immediate answer, you take your time. Someone tries to make you feel guilty. You examine the situation rather than automatically surrendering. Someone says, if you really cared, you would do this. You recognize the pressure behind the statement instead of allowing guilt to make the decision. This is not cruelty. It is psychological independence. Healthy boundaries also teach you something important about relationships. They reveal who respects you and who only respects your usefulness. When you begin saying no, some people may disappear. When you stop solving every problem, some people may stop calling. When you become less available for unnecessary demands, some relationships may change. Don't automatically interpret that as failure. Sometimes boundaries don't destroy relationships, they reveal them. The people who genuinely value you may adjust. They may not always agree with your boundaries, but they can respect them. Others may become angry because they benefited from your lack of boundaries. That difference is valuable information. As you continue practicing this, your confidence becomes quieter and stronger. You stop trying to control everyone around you. You focus on controlling your own choices. You stop demanding respect and start demonstrating self-respect through consistent behavior. And eventually, people learn something very simple about you. Your kindness is genuine, but it is not permission. Your patience is real, but it is not unlimited. Your respect for others is strong, but it does not require abandoning your respect for yourself. Set your boundaries calmly, enforce them consistently, and let your actions teach people what your words never could. Once you understand self-respect, emotional control, communication, and boundaries, you begin to notice something deeper. People often form an opinion about you before you ever explain yourself. Your presence speaks before your words do. The way you enter a room, the way you listen, the way you respond to pressure, and the way comfortable you are with silence all communicate something about your confidence. This does not mean you need to perform confidence or imitate some exaggerated image of dominance. Real presence is much simpler. It is the ability to remain grounded in yourself instead of constantly adjusting yourself to whatever is happening around you. Think about someone who enters a room and immediately starts looking for approval. They check who is watching them, change their behavior depending on who is nearby, speak louder when they want attention, and become nervous when nobody responds. Their attention is constantly moving outward. They are trying to control how everyone sees them. Ironically, that effort often makes them appear less confident. Now imagine someone who enters the same room calmly. They look around, they acknowledge people naturally, they listen, they don't rush to prove their intelligence, they don't compete for attention. They are comfortable standing quietly for a moment, their body is relaxed, their movements are deliberate, and their attention is focused on the present rather than on how they are being judged. That person has presence. Robert Greene's broader philosophy emphasizes the importance of perception. People interpret behavior long before they understand someone's intentions. This means confidence is not simply something you feel internally. It is also reflected through your behavior. If your actions communicate uncertainty, constant approval seeking, or desperation for attention, people may respond to those signals even if you tell yourself that you're confident. This is why your physical composure matters. You don't need to exaggerate your posture or stare people down. Simply stand naturally, move without rushing, make appropriate eye contact, listen when someone speaks. Avoid constantly checking your phone during conversations. Let your attention remain where you are. These small behaviors communicate something powerful. I am comfortable being here, and comfort is compelling. One of the most underrated elements of presence is the ability to listen without preparing your next sentence. When someone speaks, give them your attention. Don't immediately look for an opportunity to redirect the conversation towards yourself. Don't interrupt just to prove that you know something. Don't constantly compete for the spotlight. The person who can make others feel heard often becomes more influential than the person who constantly tries to impress. There is another important element. Don't rush. Rushing often communicates internal pressure. You rush your words because you're afraid of being misunderstood. You rush decisions because you're afraid of missing approval. You rush to respond because silence makes you uncomfortable. But confident people understand that they are allowed to take a moment. Someone asks you a difficult question, pause, think, then answer. Someone challenges your opinion. Listen, consider, then respond. You don't need to fill every silence. You don't need to have an instant answer for everything. Sometimes saying, I don't know yet, I'll think about it, communicates more confidence than pretending to know something you don't. That kind of honesty is powerful because it demonstrates that your ego is not controlling your behavior. Presence also means being comfortable with not being the center of attention. People who desperately seek attention often become predictable. They tell exaggerated stories, interrupt others, make every situation about themselves, or constantly seek reassurance. But when you stop needing attention, you become more observant. You notice details, you understand people better, you recognize the emotional atmosphere of a room, and because you are not consumed with proving yourself, you have more mental space to understand what is actually happening around you. This is where presence connects to psychological awareness. The strongest communicator is not always the person speaking. Sometimes it is the person observing. You notice who listens, who interrupts, who becomes defensive, who needs constant approval, who remains calm under pressure, who changes their personality depending on the audience. Observation gives you information, and information allows you to respond intelligently rather than impulsively. But there is an important boundary here. Presence should never become a performance designed to intimidate or manipulate people. The goal is not to make others feel small. The goal is to become so internally grounded that you don't need to make anyone else feel small in order to feel significant. That is the difference between confidence and insecurity wearing a costume. Insecurity says, I need to dominate this room. Confidence says, I am comfortable in this room. Insecurity says, everyone must notice me. Confidence says, I don't need everyone to notice me. Insecurity says, I must win this conversation. Confidence says, I can listen, disagree, and walk away. That is the kind of presence people respect because it feels authentic, and authenticity becomes especially powerful when combined with the boundaries you have already developed. When you know what you will accept, you don't have to constantly communicate your importance. Your behavior becomes consistent. You don't become overly friendly to gain approval. You don't become aggressive to gain attention. You simply remain yourself. Over time, people begin recognizing a pattern. You are calm, you are attentive, you speak deliberately. You don't chase attention, you don't panic under pressure, you don't need to prove yourself. That pattern becomes your reputation, and reputation influences respect. Remember, you cannot force people to respect your presence, but you can build a presence that communicates self-respect without saying a word. Walk into every room with less need to impress, more willingness to observe, and greater comfort with your own identity. Because when you no longer perform confidence for the approval of others, your natural composure becomes the strongest statement you make. Once you have built self-respect, learned to control your emotions, strengthened your communication, established boundaries, and developed a calm presence, there is one final principle that brings everything together: consistency. Respect is not created by one impressive conversation, one confident entrance, or one perfectly delivered sentence. Those moments may create an impression, but character determines whether that impression lasts. People eventually discover whether your confidence is real or performed. They notice whether your boundaries remain firm when pressure increases. They notice whether your calmness disappears when you are challenged. They notice whether your words match your actions. And when they see consistency, something changes. They begin to trust you. This is why you should stop trying to make people respect you instantly and start becoming the kind of person whose behavior naturally earns respect over time. The title may promise an instant transformation, but the deeper psychology is much more powerful. You cannot control another person's opinion, but you can control the signals your character sends every day. Imagine someone who speaks confidently but constantly breaks promises. At first, people may be impressed by their words. Eventually, the words lose value because the behavior contradicts them. Now imagine someone who speaks less but consistently does what they say. Their reputation grows quietly. When they make a promise, people believe it. When they establish a boundary, people know they mean it. When they say they will handle something, they follow through. That is credibility, and credibility is one of the strongest foundations of respect. Robert Greene's broader lessons about human behavior point toward a simple reality. People observe patterns. One action may be ignored, two actions may be forgotten, but repeated behavior becomes identity in the eyes of others. If you remain calm under pressure again and again, people begin to associate you with composure. If you consistently keep your word, people associate you with reliability. If you repeatedly refuse to participate in unnecessary drama, people understand that you value your peace. If you treat people respectfully while maintaining your standards, people recognize that your confidence does not depend on putting others down. Your reputation becomes the sum of these repeated choices. This is why you should never become obsessed with proving yourself in one conversation. A single conversation cannot establish what years of consistent behavior can establish. Let your actions accumulate. You do not need to announce that you are disciplined. Be disciplined. You do not need to announce that you have boundaries. Maintain them. You do not need to tell people that you are confident. Remain composed when challenged. You do not need to demand that people respect your time. Protect it. Eventually, people will understand there is also an important lesson about reliability. Being reliable does not mean saying yes to everything. In fact, one of the most reliable things you can do is be honest about what you can and cannot do. If you cannot fulfill a request, say so clearly. If you make a commitment, take it seriously. If circumstances change, communicate rather than disappearing. This creates trust because people know where they stand with you. And trust is stronger than intimidation. Anyone can make people nervous for a moment. Anyone can act dominant. Anyone can raise their voice. But making people trust your character requires something much deeper: consistency. That is why genuine respect should never depend on fear. You don't want people to respect you because they are afraid of what you might do. You want them to respect you because they know who you are. They know you are fair. They know you are composed. They know you can disagree without becoming cruel. They know you can say no without becoming hostile. They know that pressure will not easily make you betray your principles. That kind of reputation creates influence without force, and it also protects you from one of the biggest dangers of trying to appear confident: becoming arrogant. Arrogance constantly needs an audience. Confidence does not. Arrogance asks, how can I prove that I'm better? Confidence asks, how can I remain true to my standards? Arrogance needs comparison. Character needs consistency. When you stop comparing yourself to everyone around you, you become much harder to provoke. Someone else's success does not threaten you. Someone else's criticism does not define you. Someone else's attention does not determine your value. You can admire another person's strengths without feeling smaller. You can accept correction without feeling humiliated. You can celebrate someone else's success without believing that their success takes something away from you. That is maturity. And maturity creates respect because it demonstrates emotional security. There will still be people who do not respect you. Accept that. No matter how disciplined, kind, confident, or principled you become, universal approval is impossible. Someone will misunderstand you. Someone will disagree with you. Someone will dislike your boundaries. Someone may criticize your choices. Your goal is not to eliminate disagreement. Your goal is to remain stable when disagreement appears. That is the final test. Can you remain yourself when people challenge you? Can you stay respectful without becoming submissive? Can you stay confident without becoming arrogant? Can you listen without surrendering your judgment? Can you walk away without needing revenge? If you can, you have developed something far more valuable than the ability to make people respect you instantly. You have developed character. And character is what remains when the first impression disappears. So take everything from this journey and turn it into daily behavior. Respect yourself before asking for respect. Control your emotions before attempting to control a situation. Speak with purpose instead of filling every silence. Establish boundaries and enforce them calmly. Carry yourself with grounded confidence. Then repeat those principles until they become part of who you are. Eventually, you will notice that you no longer think constantly about whether people respect you. You will simply live in a way that makes your values visible. Your calmness will speak. Your boundaries will speak. Your consistency will speak. Your actions will speak. And when your character becomes stronger than your need for approval, respect stops being something you chase and becomes something your presence naturally